You can't keep using tools of oppression and expect to raise free people.
Peace, everybody. I am so glad that you are here, either listening or watching, because as you know, all February long, I'm loving on everybody that is connected to Raising Free People Network, especially our hosts. So this week, I'm here with Asia of She Said We Shed podcast. Welcome, Asia.
Hey.
She Said We Shed. If you haven't listened to that podcast yet, um, my favorite thing about it, like as a listener, I'll say that, and then I'll let Asia give you like the formal what it is and all that. But as a listener, for me, it is such a major decolonizing tool and resource because it reminds me of the importance of centering the thing that tends to feel contrary, right? And in this case, it's the idea that Black motherhood is sacred space that cannot be, disparaged upon in any way, shape, or form because, oh my God, Black women, right? And while, like many things on the surface, you hear elements of it that resonate, you can really also start to hear, if you listen enough, how that's rooted in oppression, like who that leaves out, right? And what that leaves out in terms of opportunity for us to build the type of relationship tools that we actually need as Black women and just as humans, like in all the ways, right? That's what I love about She Said We Shed, from the very concept to what Asia has done with it. I continue to recognize my right and then like celebrate other women in their practice of separating themselves from either who they needed to be in relationship with their mother or who their mother sees them as, and how that paints the picture of how we all show up, and just the power of motherhood without like also including the fact that that power comes with responsibility. And if that responsibility isn't met, as the people who suffer under that, we can both have grace and understanding and also work through the shit however we need to, right? Including zero contact. Right? So that's what I love about it, Asia. So for those of us who maybe haven't listened to a full episode, can you tell us a little bit about, what it is and why it is as far as you see it?
Yeah, so She Said We Shed is the words that keep popping up is your words, the Reclamation Project. And it's a reclamation project on self and who we are outside of our mothers, without the dominance, the expectations, the their own trauma, all that stuff, working through it and recognizing honestly, who they are, who our mothers are, what they were dealing with, what they took and put upon you, and then recognizing that you can move away from it, free yourself from it, adjust however you need to from it, and it not be like you're not bad because you decide you need to do that for yourself. And so, like Akila said, there's so many, it's so taboo, to have like honest conversations about motherhood, especially Black moms, and it's a space where it's not taboo, because the reality of it is I started this because of my own journey, but then also because I started seeing so many women make comments about their relationship with their mothers and how it was anywhere from abusive and they didn't know it to just troubling, and nobody was really having honest conversations about it. And so I'm like, I really want to start this space so we can have some real conversations about it, because if we pretend or just keep up this facade, it's not going to change. And how can you honestly unschool and decolonize yourself but ignore that part, especially when you're still in communication with your mom? And so then you go in her space and pretend or don't voice your opinions, or however that plays out for you. How can you decolonize in the rest of your life And then when you get around your mom, you're back in this other space. It just doesn't really work. So
It does not work. And we try so hard to work it, right?
mhm.
Asia, it's like it's on both sides because we know that even when we talk about the rights of young people, that's one of the spaces where people are the least willing
Yeah.
oftentimes. And I think that's in part because many of us, we were that. And so because we haven't dealt with it at all, like
Yes.
what you've been so like openly doing, it's really easy to be it on the other side,
Yeah.
right? To perpetuate those same things that happen to you in your relationships without even recognizing that you're doing that. And you're not doing this from this like anthropological or academic approach. It's very anthropological, actually, and it would fit into a lot of different realms because it's its own course of study. But you're also doing it from a deeply personal space.
Yeah.
And
I
you
tried not
hear
to.
that in the stories. You hear it. You hear it. If you were about to say you try not to mix that in, too late, new format, because you do. And that's what makes it so valuable to me. It doesn't feel like somebody telling me about something they're merely interested in, right?
Mhm.
Like you live it. Your schedule for the production of the podcast is affected by your own
Yes.
deschooling. It's
Which
a
we'll talk about.
living experience, right? Let's talk about that now. It's a living experience, right?
It's a living experience. And, we went on break and the break was not planned. It was, one of the things that happened to me last year was, especially with, I think COVID triggered it. But, one of the things you were just talking about, how if you don't address these things, you can just perpetuate them and not really know it. But even if you are addressing them, you can still perpetuate them because you still have these traumas. I have these traumas. And one of the things I realized last year, learned, was that I have CPTSD, and the way it plays out, and the way it impacts my body, and the way I just show up day to day hyper vigilant, and all these kind of things is it got to a point last year where it was just too much. I could not continue the recording schedule, and even work. I cut down on my work halfway and all these things. And so it like you said, it is really based on my life and what I'm doing. And so I just had hit a point of like, even my doctors were telling me, you have to pause on everything that you can. You need
Yeah.
to stop. You need to rest. You need to, and so we're going to start back up. And I really want to dig into healing, because that's what I spent all of 2020 working on. And it took me places I never would have thought that I would have been going. But it also brought some back to the whole thing we were just talking about, some deep realizations. Like I never would have thought I had CPTSD. I never really would have thought that my hypervigilance and all the stuff that I've always been thinking is normal is not normal and impacts me in so many ways. And then let's not even talk about your physical health, how it starts breaking down your physical health. And so, I just kind of hit a crisis point last year personally.
Not kinda,
No, I did.
And you were doing so many things in the middle of it. Y'all probably remember her name from the network. That was one of the things that you had to pause. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to pause a lot. So, and I was feeling so upset about it. Like I was thinking, well, it's not fair. It's not, but one of the things that I really learned last year was rest. I never had been allowed to rest. I never had been allowed to know what it feels like to give myself the space between activities. I didn't know what it felt like to say, you don't have it today and it's quite all right, right? Like in the past, I would have, no, you got to do these things. You're going to do these things. And so, I swear I had weekends where I literally laid up in the bed the entire weekend, and no guilt, no nothing, because I have finally come to a point, you pray you don't have to hit crisis to get these understandings, right? But I was just in crisis. And so there's no guilt around like, this is what I need. And if I, even still, I'm still managing my energy. So I still don't move around like I used to. I still can't do a million errands in a day or, you know, all this kind of stuff. Just 2 weeks ago, I was like, had energy and I was excited. And so I had cleaned the house and done this stuff and I thought I was going to cook. And then I sat down for a minute and I was like, I ain't cooking nothing. Like, I don't have no energy to stand in that kitchen, legit, no energy. So, you know, it's just a process, but the podcast is deeply personal. And what I love about it is the women willing to come share their stories and talk with me about these things. Because I do think because it is such a taboo topic, you do feel so alone in it, right? And you can even feel alone in it in your family.
Of course.
Yep. So like your siblings might have a different experience or they don't take it in the way you take it in, or, you know, all these things. With me, my siblings are so much younger than me that they didn't have the same mom. They still have some junk, but they don't have the mom I had, you know? And so that's an isolating thing. So having this space where like we hear other women and then even just the interactions, I don't call them, like I don't put on the description, Asia interviewed so-and-so, I call them conversations, because it to me, it's a straight up conversation, because it's like, oh, you my sister in this like mama trauma junk, you know, and
you're willing to say something about it, as you said. It's like, that's one of the threads among all of us on the network, that we are very much that one, whether it's in the family and or our communities, who were experiencing either similar things to a lot of people around us or having a very different experience than people who were immediately like in our immediate environment, but we're willing to like seek community around it, which is exactly what it feels like when you listen to those conversations on She Said, We Shed. You know that you are kind of like a fly on the wall in a conversation that is, you know, kind of hard won. The space to have that conversation is really hard won, because you got to be like, as you say, like, this is about so much more than me. I cannot afford to take in your criticisms and pause based on that. I'm pausing based on other shit like my health.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, it's interesting because, like you said, and I've heard so many people respond to me about the podcast, and they, you know, they range, right? So like some people are still in communication they're doing every day, you know, and then others are like me where now we just not doing that. I'm not in communication with my mother. And the thing is, I always remember when I made the decision to go no contact, it was strictly because I had tried a million other ways to heal, and I couldn't heal in the space with her still doing the stuff. And so, you know, I know for a fact that my mother saw it as like abandoning her or an angry thing. But for me, it was just, I just need to heal. And this ain't got nothing to do with you at all. And this is the only way I know how I could actually start really healing, because I've been trying in your space, but I keep getting re-traumatized. So that ain't it. And at this point, I'm more important to me than me trying to keep up this thing with you. And I think, you know, it allows women to come to that kind of place wherever they are on the spectrum in their own self.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, Asia. And again, it's so powerful because it is so particular to you. Like, what you're not trying to give us, like, you know, insights of it in a broad general sense, because it is so particular to you. One of the interesting things about it, like much of unschooling, is that the deeper you go, it's like the broader the reach of it, right? Yes. So like so much when I get the feedback about this particular podcast, one of the things that I hear is like, this is not even just about Black mamas, right?
Yeah.
It is. It absolutely is, without apology, because it needs to be. But it's also about all of the other ways that the privilege that comes with a certain level of power, the responsibility side of that coin is not being examined. So, and there's so many versions of that, right? We go through that problem, that crisis in so many ways, in our own bodies, in romantic relationships, in business relationships. in so many ways. So when I listen to an episode of She Said, We Shed, I'm taking in what you're saying within the context you're saying it, but I also get the benefit of that education across contexts. Because
Yeah.
then I say, what are some of the ways that my position of power as my children's mother is actually getting in the way of the spaces that they need to heal, in the way
Mhm.
that I'm not allowing because I don't understand it, or it's not how I like it, or I'm really sure that it's a problem actually. The same, just same sorts of lines of reasoning that someone used when they were abusive to me. I can now recognize it, even if my intention isn't the same. The
Right.
responsibility to examine it is there. And I feel like She Said, We Shed, like that's part of its design. It's designed like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy also, even when you go through the whole unschool and all that, I still think it's so easy to um, pick out and separate your mothering, right? And
Of
so
course.
you can excuse, all these things with your mothering. And so I think this is a vehicle that just shines a light on, no, your mothering, and like I said earlier in the conversation, even with the realizations and recognitions and all that, I realized, dang, I still got some junk, I still got some issues, that I'm still putting on to my son. Like I said, the hypervigilance, the all this stuff, and it's like, ooh, that is
Right. But now we're not walking around with it like a big Sunday hat,
right, like,
you know?
hey, yeah, exactly,
And we're also
exactly.
not shaming ourselves and trying to hide it, because that's the other side of the coin that I love
Hmm.
that you talk about. Even just again, even in the title, She Said, right? This is something that was said upon me, given to me. We shed. It was not
Hmm.
I shed, it's we, because there's resources that you need internally and communally. Like even when you said, yeah, CPTSD, that's not something you could have come up necessarily with on your own, no matter
No.
how deep your.
Nope.
So you talk a lot about, community care, like the versions of that, whether it means therapy or counseling, or
Yeah.
having the podcast like this, or some of the things I know we'll be doing next year in terms of bringing you in for some of our field trips, so that some of
Hmm.
the women who are committed to raising free people, and men and non-binary folks, can be in community with somebody who's not trying to front, like, yeah,
Right.
I got the mothering part down, but also being really honest about, this is not just about the issue. This is about what healing looks like. This is about what it looks like for me specifically. Here's what I'm
Exactly.
noticing. What you noticing? Like,
Yeah.
it's just such an ecology of support. It's not a one. You can't heal yourself by thinking about it deeper. And I feel like you talk about all of that on the podcast.
Yeah, you can't, because it's necessary, right? Like I'm a deep proponent for group therapy, and I don't even mean therapy with a therapist, but just when you have a group and you're doing this thing together, it's so many things around. If you just say this thing, I might have never thought that was an issue for me, but the minute you say it, I'm like, oh snap, I do that. That's me. You know what I mean? So to me, it's like a virtual group therapy type of thing. And yeah, you're right. Like the reason I realized or learned about the whole CPTSD is I was talking to my therapist one day and she goes nonchalantly, because when people have PTSD, they do da 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 da. And I was like, wait, hold up. You think I got PTSD? And she's like, do you not? And I'm like, wait, do we have to have a whole conversation here? Because I'm not understanding. And that's legit how it was. And like, I never in my head had and PTSD and CPTSD are two different things.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, wait, hold up. So now both of these, like, let me go do some research. I'm a researcher. So I'm like, let me go. And I started researching and I was like, whoa. Yeah, that's me. But I would have, like you said, never in my life would I have come to that conclusion on my own, because my way of thinking, my way of seeing is normal to me.
Yeah.
This is what I've always known, because my mother has raised me the way she did from day one. So it's not like I was raised one way and then it's a switch. So this is what is normal. I'm thinking everybody does this kind of stuff, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I love that you don't separate, because it is such a decolonized approach to healing. It's really powerful to witness that you don't separate your own unschooling practice. Like, again, you don't front like it's this or that or a point of arrival or whatever.
Yeah.
It influences your relationship with B, influences what you even want to heal in yourself, but it's also not for him.
Yeah.
Which is important for us to, like, of course we want him to benefit. He might even be the catalyst in some moments, but it's for Asia.
Yeah. Exactly. It's for me. And I've even had those kind of conversations with him. Like, look, you know, you do some funky stuff too, and that ain't good for me either. And this ain't about you. This is about me. So when you come with that funky stuff, because I'm priority now, I'm gonna walk in my room. I'm gonna take my space. I'm gonna do whatever I gotta do if you're not willing to hear that I can't be in the midst of this right now. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that has been huge that came out of last year was my boundaries. And a lot of people think they have boundaries, and they might, but then they're wonky with their kids. And so, you know, I'm going to talk about that because, boy, when I tell you my boundaries, even when my child was like, boom, and I would say stuff and people were like, oh, you what? Yeah, because I got to take care of me. Yes. Like, if I don't take care of me, who's going to take care of him? Yeah. And I'm in a deep place right now. So if I got to protect myself from him, if you will, in this moment, I'm going to do that too. And so, you know, I'm not going to let this slide, or I'm not going to, no. And even this morning, we had gotten to a tiff, and I read this thing and I told myself, because yesterday we had gotten to a tiff too, and I had got into it with him. And today and last night I was like, Asia, you legit cannot have this stress. Like, it's not a matter of you shouldn't get into that. Like, you can't. And so today I was telling myself, I said, I love myself too much to argue or get into stressful situations. And I just kept telling myself that, because that's the way I had to remember, like, it's so easy to get pulled in, but no, you love yourself too much, and you're not going to sacrifice your health for this silliness. Like, it's not even worth it.
You cannot afford it.
Yeah. And then at the same time, he's learning, like, it's easy to get pulled into that, but no, we don't have to do this. So even with me putting myself first in my healing and all that, it's still thoroughly teaching him, you know, how to be, who to be, example, leading by example type of thing. Even with my boundaries just going crazy, he learning, oh, those are what boundaries are.
That's right? Okay for her. That's not okay for her. Here's how she reacts. These are life skills. And that because you're approaching it, you know, from this space of really wanting to heal and not just wanting to hide, then you can have the conversations with him from that space of like, yes, this is what I'm doing and here's why, as opposed to just shutting him out, or, you know, like, it is so, so powerful. And so these are the sort of things that we can look forward to next season. We got lots of it in the first season, but there's so much more, you know, because I imagine now that's what I want to talk about too, because you've already alluded to some of what you'll be talking about in this coming season. Tell us a little bit more about what to expect, what you're feeling.
Yeah, so there's so much running through my head around it, but the primary theme is healing. But it's like you said, when you unwrap one level, it just keeps getting deeper, you know. And so some of the things that really came out of last year was, like I said, the boundaries. You know, I thought I knew I never had good boundaries, but I thought I had started putting them in place. But then I realized I really wasn't using them for real with my child. And it was causing some issues, but nothing was strong enough to make me be like, oh, you need to, but this was like, nah, you need to do this. So really learning how to have boundaries with my child. And then one of the huge things for me was having to move away from what I thought would be the fixer. And so, like, really learning how to have an open mind that, I'll just be blunt so we can get to it. But, you know, most people say, pray, go to the doctor, right? And straight up, the doctors mess me up more. And every Western doctor I saw messed me up more. And I saw at least 7, 8 doctors last year. what led me to the healing that I have gotten to was somatic experiential therapy, which is like body work, releasing trauma from your cells, from your nervous system, nature, how would you even, spiritual energy sessions, all this like out of the box stuff that you would never really consider. Or if you're Christian, you're like, oh, I can't do that type of thing, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, there was some things that I even challenged myself on, like, are you really about to do this? Because I'm like, I got my old junk going on, and I'm like, nah, we about to do this because I need to. So, just really pushing what I thought would be helpful and all this kind of stuff. And really the commonality in these other things is that they all pulled me back to self. And the doctors is all outside, right? We tell you what to do, this and that, but all these other things pulled me back to self, pulled me back to my inner knowing, like, you can do this. I'm just here to guide you or help you, but one of the biggest things that I want to talk about in the context of mothering and being a child from a mother like this and stuff is one of the things my somatic therapist told me about the doctor, but it's so, like you said, it's so much more than just like this one thing. And she said, stop listening to these doctors if it don't align with what you know inside, right? And so that was so deep to me, because you get so ingrained on, they know, they went to medical school, they do all the things, right? But it took me of being like, who helped me this year and who didn't? And every time. And so now it's like, that's not just with the doctor, right? Like, if your mother say this thing and that ain't, but you shut your mouth or you do this thing, but that is not it, right? Yep. So talking about like your intuition, your inner knowing, your inner being, and really, really learning how to trust that, because a lot of the commonality that we all have, people who can really relate to this podcast, is you learn how to distrust yourself. You don't trust yourself anymore. I thought my intuition was crap. You know what I learned last year? My intuition had always been on point, and
I remember that
my mom's world. That's why she ain't like it. Right?
Yep, I remember when you noticed that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but she had me thinking it was trash, but no, it wasn't. And so, touching on that, like your inner person, your inner being, slowing down. One of the huge things is slowing down, and not in the ways that we typically think and you'll read about in an article in Forbes, like not that kind of slowing down. Even self-care, I want to talk about self-care, and not in a Forbes-y kind of way. Like what our understanding of self-care is so
capitalistic and commercialized, right?
Exactly.
It's like, how much money can you manage to spend on the thing that you've always wanted to do that you saw in the magazine?
Right. And that is not self-care, because you can still go do that thing and not be caring for yourself.
And be really harmful to other people there trying to care for themselves, because we're not actually doing that thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So those are kind of where I'll be going next season, and digging deeper into that. And then interviews, I have some interviews already done, and I'm super excited about the first one. It's going to be about no contact, because, a lot of women are like, I can't do that. You're like, that's a whole nother, that's extreme. Yeah. Is it though?
Talk about what's extreme, what you've been living in, as you said, but we get used to it. Like, we've been living in extreme circumstances. We've been in war zones, but then we scared, of another type of war. Man, it's just, so this is exactly why I needed to make sure that y'all heard in one spot, right? Yeah. What Asia is talking about. And you've also been on some other podcasts. I'm going to put a couple of links there too, to just really share, because I like listening to those, because it's different than listening to you on your podcast, because different people are going to bring different things out of
energy.
Yeah. So y'all got time. I'm going to put some of the links here, especially if you're watching on YouTube. I'm going to put those links so you can listen and really engage. And if this resonates for you, Asia, where can we go to make sure that we are following along? We're getting updates about anything you're doing, whether it's the podcast or the community around She Said We Should.
Yeah, so the website is shesaidweshed.com. And then Instagram is at She Said We Shed Podcast. And I think, honestly, that's the only social media because I ain't got the energy to manage the rest.
Yes, love it. Thank you so much, Asia. And we are so looking forward to continuing to listen and just kind of growing and evolving and healing with you.
Thank you for seeing it as something that the masses needed to hear. So,
Facts.